Okay, greeting everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Avel Espiritu, and I'm with Red 5 Lean Performance. And I'm honored to serve as your host and introduce our esteemed speaker today. Before we begin, let me briefly address a few housekeeping matters. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation for best audio quality, and unmute yourself if you wish to participate in the later question and answer session. Also note that this session is being recorded for future access by those unable to attend today. And so we'll be sharing the links to that on our LinkedIn page and in our YouTube as well too. So without further ado, so we are Lean YEG. We're a dedicated committee of volunteers responsible for organizing the Edmonton Lean Community of Practice. And we host a Lean Coffee session on the third Friday of every month from September through June between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. These sessions provide a very unique platform where passionate Lean practitioners like yourselves can come together to engage in insightful discussions, expand your knowledge, and explore the practical applications of Lean methodologies. Now, for our final session before the summer hiatus, we are very delighted to have a truly distinguished speaker today who will delve into an intriguing challenge that resonates with many of us in the Lean community of practice. Over the decades, it has been proven to be difficult to move Lean forward from a niche management practice to one that is commonly found in organizations of all types. Our speaker today is widely recognized leader on uncovering the network of factors that impede the advancement of Lean management. And today's presentation will highlight many 16 years of research to unravel the mystery of why most top leaders remain fully committed to this archaic classical management style. Please join me. The Edmonton Lean Community of Practice is pleased to give a warm welcome to our speaker for today, a Lean practitioner and professor of Lean management for nearly 30 years, renowned author of 27 books and dozens of research papers, Dr. Bob Emiliani.
Well, hello. Yeah, great. Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. Yeah, so the question, the thing that's interested me for quite a number of years, as you now gather, is why is it so difficult to move Lean management out of its niche practice into something that's much more commonly found in all organizations? And so what we find is the past just retains a strong grip on the present. And sociologist Douglas Dowd said many years ago, probably about 50 years ago now, what's next is most likely to be determined by what is. And so because of the legacy of how we've understood and done things in the past, that continues to be with us today, and we're kind of trapped. And of course, as Lean practitioners, we all make a big effort to try to get out of that trap and move, overcome the barriers and move forward. If you don't know my background, I think the important things are just my years in industry as a manager in engineering, manufacturing, and supply chain management, and that I've been involved with this for a long time. The training by Shingijutsu was very, very important, continues to be in my understanding and practice of Lean and TPS and so forth. All of my degrees are in engineering, as you can see, but in order to understand why we remain trapped in the past, I really had to become a sociologist and obtain that that understanding and capability to move things forward. As you know, there's a lot of happy talk in Lean world, and the focus is on the positive and success stories and so forth. And that's great, but there comes a point where that begins to be kind of a denial of the reality of what's going on. And so I'm sure you, like everybody else, me too, we like a lot of feel-good talks, but at some point we need to start to talk about some of Lean's biggest problems and how we're having such difficulty moving forward in having more organizations that successfully transform from classical management, the old way of doing things, to Lean management, the new way of doing things, and as well as recognize the problems with the Lean movement itself, which essentially is doing the kinds of things that were done 100 years ago in trying to advance scientific management. And we don't recognize collectively that as a problem, and particularly our top Lean promoters and influencers don't see that as a problem and just continue to be what's next is most likely to be determined by what is, continuing to do what was in the past. Henry Gantt was a colleague of Frederick Winslow Taylor. Gantt, the Gilbreth, Taylor, these were all people that participated in the development of scientific management, which part of that was known as industrial administration, and subsequent to being known as scientific management became industrial engineering. And so Gantt was a person with considerable experience, a straight talker, and he said the usual way of doing a thing is always the wrong way. And so whatever we are engaged in, and particularly in a workplace setting, I don't really think you should bring a lot of lean thinking into the home. I mean, there's certain things that you will do to try to make it a little bit less walking distance in the kitchen and so forth. But generally speaking, the home is pretty well organized. But it's a different situation in the workplace. And so we need to question how we do things in the workplace. And we also need to question how we sell or promote or try to advance lean to our C-level leaders. And again, we continue to kind of do things the way they were done in the past and without any fresh thinking, other than that, today you have the internet, and so you have online training and so forth, and conferences that you can attend online, et cetera. But the analog version of all this stuff was occurring 100 years ago. So we need to talk more about the big problems that exist in lean world, both in terms of lack of lean transformations as well as the lean movement itself. I guess I should also say, one of the things you'll see in this presentation is some of the things that we need to learn from history to avoid repeating those errors. And of course, one of the, what Gantt said earlier about the usual way of doing a thing is always the wrong way. And it's the broad-based applicability of that statement needs to be understood so we stop repeating the same mistakes. So there has been a fundamental error in the advancement of lean, which we could have learned from the people who were trying to advance scientific management, because their work was extremely well documented through various publications and books and so on. And so had we studied those things 35, 40 years ago, we would have learned that we should have had a different hypothesis regarding what our leaders' wants and needs. So we went forward with lean, assuming we knew what business leaders wanted, and it turned out to be wrong. And that's because what did we lack? A factual understanding of how leaders think and what is most important to them. We didn't bother to understand past and current state of the people who lead organizations. The focus was the current and future state of processes within organizations, but not with leadership itself. And so the assumption that we know what leaders want, which is low cost, high quality, short lead times, market share, profits, et cetera, is actually turns out to be an extremely narrow understanding of what leaders want, and that has proven to be a big mistake. What essentially has happened here, and as lean practitioners, one of the mortal sins in lean world is to jump to solutions without understanding the problem. And lean management itself is a jump to a solution without having understood the problem. And that, of course, is quite ironic. So we have two related problems that most leaders resist, reject, or ignore lean management. And this has been going on a long time, happened in the days of scientific management as well. I often like to refer to lean management as, in a more broad sense, of progressive management, doing things in a new way, that would suggest progress moving forward compared to doing things the old way. So historically, leaders have resisted, rejected, or ignored progressive management. And this goes way back in time, thousands of years, not just some recent event. And the other thing is people engaged with lean just simply do not understand how tradition functions as a near total replacement for thinking among most business leaders. And so a simple example of the tradition is that, when you have a financial problem in an organization, what do? You lay people off, you close plants and squeeze suppliers. This has been the kind of thing that's been going on for hundreds of years. It's nothing new. And this tradition gets carried forward. as the only answer to the problem. For most leaders, that's the only answer to your financial problem. And so, with lean management, we would say, well, you need to understand the processes and where the waste, unevenness, unreasonableness is, and eliminate that, and then your costs will go down, and blah blah blah, and everything else improves, etc. But not interested in doing that. Not interested in pursuing that line of sort of rational line of um, dealing with problems. So Frederick Winslow Taylor, another little history lesson here, and I'll highlight what's in red, said 9/10 of our trouble has been to bring those on the management side to do their fair share of work. Only 1/10 of our trouble has come on the workman side. Invariably, we find very great opposition on the part of those on the management side to do their new duties. So one of the things Frederick Taylor, and this is not well understood, it's largely misunderstood, Frederick Taylor wasn't just putting a stopwatch on the workers and suggesting that you need to change how you do things. But he was also telling management, you need to change how you do things. You have new duties and new responsibilities under scientific management. And of course, the leaders opposed that. And the workmen at that time there wasn't much opposition to it because they could see a pathway to doing work that was easier and that they were more highly compensated for and so forth. And of course, there was workers that were suspicious and so forth. And when union came along, they were suspicious as well. And there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation and so forth, and disinformation as well. But this point that the thing that Taylor ran into, and this started in the 1890s when he was running into this stuff, and the quote is from 1912. So, for more than a century, people have been wondering, why do we have this problem? Why don't leaders do things that are clearly in their own best interest to improve the performance of the company, have a better relationships with employees and suppliers and customers, and on and on and on? You know all about it. Why doesn't this happen? Well, it shows you we don't understand the nature of the problem. We jump to the solution, lean management. That's the solution to the problem of how organizations are led and managed, and solution to improving processes and so on. So the typical understanding of what's going on is superficial. You see here an enumeration of some of the things that people say, that there's leaders, there's a fear of change, they're not engaged, they're not trained in lean, they have no desire to change, they can't let go of command and control. None of these are wrong, but they're also not in-depth understandings of what's really happening here, and to why leaders over this long span of time, take it as 120 years, if you like, for the sort of modern version of progressive management, or much further back in time, why did the pharaohs, run their kingdoms the way they did, and not really interested in much in the way of change. So anyway, I spent a long time, initially first focused on, so this would be starting in the middle 1990s, early to middle 1993-4 timeframe, understanding, what is lean leadership, what is a lean leader, how do they think, what do they do, etc. And so I did a lot of work between the mid-90s through 2007 on that. And then I carried on that line of research as well, but then spent 16 years, starting in 2007, to understand this problem of why leaders resist, reject, ignore progressive management. And so what I came to name this, and the reason why they reject it, relates to something called the institution of leadership, which, as you can see on the left-hand side, is, I define it as the social habits of mind, common thinking of a group, and to unravel the mystery of why leaders do that. Or really major change of any kind. So one of the things that I've found out is that other, people who have read this book, on the left, Triumph of Classical Management, and the other ones, realize that any kind of major change is difficult. The leaders don't want that change. They prefer to stay in the status quo. Again, what Douglas Dowd said, what is next most likely to be determined by what is. And that holds true for whether it's agile or TQM or anything else, any kind of major sort of change, the leaders are not real interested in that. Technical change, yes, new machinery, new software, etc., AI, great. But social change in particular, respect for people, listening to operators, letting operators try out their idea, they're not very interested in that. Anyway, the books basically give you the lay of the land, and describe the current state of leadership so you can hopefully identify some solutions. And also importantly, if you understand the lay of the land, you're much smarter, more intelligent, and have the opportunity to avoid risks and harm that could come to you. Because many lean professionals, they really push on this hard internally in their company and saying, we really need to do this, boss, and you don't understand, and let me give you these books, and we're way behind, and we need to get with it, and so forth. And they end up getting fired or demotivated or something like that, or lateraled or demoted, certainly demotivated when all that happens. And they don't understand why. And so they basically run into a buzzsaw, and they've done harm to themselves by not understanding the lay of the land. If you look at the bottom, one of the reasons why leaders prefer classical management is because it maximizes leaders' status, rights, and privileges. And this stuff is even more important than profits and market share and so forth. I'm not saying profits and market share and so forth are not important, but status, rights, and privileges are even more important. So, classical management delivers on some of the things that are most important to leaders. And it also, delivers on profits, market share, and so forth, and especially on status, rights, and privileges. So why change it if it delivers what leaders want? So this is what makes it difficult to move forward. Now, if you look at a schematic of the evolution of classical and progressive management, the top is a purple arrow. Classical management is ancient in origins, goes back to the time of ancient Egypt, and probably earlier, probably to the Neolithic Revolution, so about 12,000 years ago. And that it's purple because those are the origins of, that is the color associated with royalty and so forth, and leaders and whatnot. Classical management and leadership, as it's taught in school and as you read about it in books, is really treated as a non-technical discipline. And it is rooted in preconception. So both leadership and classical management and the associated leadership thinking and routines and so forth are rooted in preconceptions. And whereas if you look at our evolution of progressive management, the oldest discipline in engineering is military engineering. Out of that comes civil, comes mechanical, comes industrial management, industrial engineering, and so forth to the right. But out from industrial management, industrial engineering pops out Toyota management. I put the date 1950, but maybe you could start it a little earlier in the pre-World War II period. What's important to note here is that the origin of progressive management is the technical disciplines of engineering and science, where you have the scientific method, trial and error, experimentation to find out what works, it fails, how do we make it better, etc. You don't do that in classical management. TPS and Lean are rooted in sensory perceptions, and these sensory perceptions are from trying things out, getting your hands dirty, and so forth. And of course, leaders typically don't get their hands dirty. They don't like to try things out because they're concerned about the consequences and so on. They don't like to experiment much. They like to have known knowns rather than dealing with unknowns. And so Lean and Toyota's management system, they're not the same thing. They're different. Lean is a Western derivative interpretation of TPS in the Toyota way. Even in that derivative interpretation, you can still have some remarkable success with that. But it is also rooted in sensory perceptions. Go to the Gemba, try it out, etc. Similar thinking has been associated with Lean. So preconceptions versus sensory perceptions is a critically important distinction. Of course, it's not 100%, at the top for classical management. It's not 100% preconceptions and 0% sensory perceptions, but the dominant way leaders lead in classical management is through preconceptions. And the dominant way leaders lead in TPS and Lean is through sensory perceptions, fact-based, understanding of things. And you could look at this diagram and view the top part of classical management because it's large. It changes a little bit over time. You see a straight purple line. It suggests there's no change. But there is a little bit of change over time, a little bit of evolution of classical management. But you could characterize it as reflecting the mindset of whatever is right. Whereas in the bottom, the progression of progressive management there reflects a mindset that says whatever is wrong, meaning we need to continuously improve and adjust to changing environments. We come up with a product or a service, it works, but customers complain, or we recognize deficiencies in the product or service, so we make improvements and so on. So there's a dramatically different mindset here with classical management, that the idea of whatever is right, more or less, and at the bottom half of the diagram, whatever is wrong. And this is another extremely interesting, extremely important point. We have, oftentimes many overlooked words of wisdom. There's important things that Taiichi Ono says in his book Toyota Production System that are contained in the preface. I think a lot of people just skip over the preface, but one of the things he says in the preface was TPS was developed for a market-based economy, a buyer's market rather. And classical, the old way of doing things is for a seller's market. And a lot of people don't pick up on that point. In other words, a buyer's market, you have competition. A seller's market, you have very little or no competition. And so you have a different management system, TPS and the Toyota way, for a competitive buyer's market. And if you have a non-competitive seller's market, then you can, of course, do classical management, and there's no problem there for you doing that, other than customers won't like your quality, your lead time, or your prices. And then you run the risk, if you classical management, run a business in a classical management way that's designed for a seller's market, but then you're actually living in a buyer's market situation. That's no good, because you're not managing to the marketplace. Or if you have a seller's market and competition comes in, then you're unprepared to deal with competition because you don't know how to compete. That's a different thing. I can run a mile, but I don't know how to competitively run a mile. There's a big difference between those two things. So Fujio Cho, former president and CEO of Toyota, said our way of thinking is very difficult to copy or even to understand. And there's Toyota people who tell you that, I've been here 30 years in this company and I don't even understand it. So you see people, what do they say? Lean's common sense. Okay, well, Lean and TPS are not exactly the same thing, but the reality is, if you really, get into this, the right way to think about this is yeah, I don't understand it. There's so much more to understand. And then Ono said, we're doomed to failure if we do not initiate a daily destruction of our various preconceptions. You'll see in a moment a diagram about preconceptions, but what he's basically concerned about there is preconceptions related to manufacturing and business and a little bit related to economics. So basically 3 categories of preconceptions, and you'll see more in a moment, but there's more than that. One of the difficulties that I find is Lean professionals tend to listen more to their Lean influencers rather than to these people who, had a different understanding of what they're trying to do compared to Lean world. Akio Toyoda, who's recently moving on to the CEO's role, said these words to a bunch of technical high school graduates in 2021. Said that, the media and experts, they provide various perspectives and opinions, but what matters most in the end is Genshiken Butsu. I think you all know what that means. Go see the facts for yourself. Go see the facts for yourself. So sensory perceptions and understanding the reality of the situation. Take the approach of finding the facts yourself based upon the source, such as someone said this and it was written that, and then reflecting. Why is this so? Is this right? It is important to try to get a handle on the facts yourself. I hope you try to do your best. So when he says question things, why is this so? Is this right? Do you do it? Do I do it? Do you do it? You'll hear famously CEOs say, company exists to maximize shareholder value. Do you bother to question this? You say, how do I know that's true? Now, if you raise your hand in the meeting with the CEO and say, where'd you hear that? How do I know that that's true? Is it true just because you said it? Is it written in law? Is it corporate policy? What is this? Where did this come from? And of course, what you'll find is it's just a choice. There's no, there's no law for doing this, etc. But very few people bother to question things. Why is this so? Is this right? And I find in my, teaching for many years that maybe 1 in 50 students questions things. They'll raise their hand and say, yeah, I always wondered about that. And I looked into it and it turns out to be a bunch of BS. Nobody else does that. And so, one of the problems we have is in Lean world, your most famous Lean influencer, whoever you like to pick, or pick somebody like me. And what I'm saying here today, why is this so? Is this right? How do you know? Go get the facts. Certainly leaders don't question what their influencers say. So if I'm a CEO and I say XYZ, my peer group CEO is going to, probably believe it without questioning anything. Just take it as it is. You should question what I say. You should question what other people say. Question what your Lean influencers say, and so on. So when we need to test our assumptions, and when we don't, we run into problems because those untested assumptions override facts. So we have preconceptions, and they are the antecedent to our cognitive biases. Preconceptions are the baseline theory, what you believe to be true, and there's no testing associated with that. We just, have grown up with many, many, many preconceptions, and it comes from our parents and whoever, and our teachers and the news and whatever it is. And we don't test. And then we have cognitive biases where we fit information to our preconceptions, also no testing. And from that, we end up making predictions based upon those preconceptions and cognitive biases. Typically leads us to superficial and illogical reasoning, closed-mindedness, make lots of errors, bad decisions, and we get stuck in the status quo. And so Ono is saying you have to destroy your preconceptions. So he's trying to disrupt this model and say you need to test your baseline theory when it comes to certain things in the workplace. And you need to also challenge your cognitive biases so you can break out of the status quo. Otherwise, you remain stuck there. So in my work, what I've identified is a number of categories of preconceptions: economic, social, political, etc., spiritual, and there's a few more, but suffice it for now for those 8. And I've drawn them showing their piping to illustrate their interconnectedness. And what I'm trying to do by illustrating this is to say it's a closed system. And what Lean people are trying to do is to poke a hole into this system, and inject new preconceptions, social, economic, historical, etc. And that's really hard to do. So when you go to a leader and give them a presentation on Lean, and here's why we should do Lean and so forth, you're probably presenting a couple of economic preconceptions, a couple of social preconceptions, a couple of business preconceptions, and that's about it. But each one of these categories has 10 to 15 preconceptions associated with them. So you've maybe addressed 6 or 8 preconceptions, if I'm being generous. Then there's another, 110 to go. And even if you were able to address all those preconceptions, the leader might then say, yeah, sounds good. I believe you. We should be doing this, but I'm the boss, so the answer is no. Because that means I have to do something different. I've got to think different. I've got to learn new things. And, I'm kind of tired. I'm, older in years, or maybe I'm not tired, but I just don't want to do this. So this is the kind of thing that we're facing. And there's many more preconceptions to destroy than what Ono was talking about. That's why these logical arguments that you put forward don't convince leaders. So Deming, in his book, The New Economics, started to sketch out something called the system of profound knowledge. And in my work, I essentially produced what I've named the opposite, the system of profound privilege, which essentially says, since I'm the boss, it's my right and privilege to do, kind of whatever I want, perhaps within certain limits, depends on what the board might say or whether the employees will go along with it. But essentially, we have a situation where, Deming's work and Deming's system of profound knowledge, which parallels some of the thinking of TPS and Toyota Way, is largely ignored by CEOs. They just don't care about this. Deming is irrelevant to most CEOs. And the reason why they don't think much of Deming is because his 14 points, which you may be familiar with, diminish the status, rights, and privileges of leaders. So they're not interested in that. So on the left-hand side, there's a description of the institution of leadership and the system of profound privilege, which has things stay more the same. I mean, you've heard the phrase, the more things change, the more they stay the same. French newspaper person, Alphonse Karr, said that in 1848. So what does the institution of leadership look like? Well, typically nobody says these things out loud, but it's true that if you've engaged with senior leaders, and these are traditions that have been handed down a long time, just highlight some things in red. This is the mentality of top leaders. Do not go to where the workers work. Make them come to you. Listen, when you have to be in front of workers, and hopefully not avoid that, but if you have to, listen attentively to what workers say, but ignore what they have to say. I'm sure many of you have been in meetings with the boss, and there's not a pen or a piece of paper there to take notes. They come empty-handed, and they're leaving empty-handed in terms of, I did my job, which is basically to, have my all hands meeting or skip level meeting, listen to people's complaints or whatever they're, but I'm not going to do anything. Respecting workers and their work shows weakness. Don't do it. Never let facts impede your decision making. Create disturbances to keep workers on edge. You're always wondering why we have this initiative and that initiative and so on. Fear is your greatest power. Be generous with it. Always blame workers for your failures. Progress exceed the status quo by more than a tiny increment. Learn from others, but ignore the outliers. So here in the US, in the airline industry, the outlier was Herb Kelleher in Southwest Airlines. And what he was doing was, in terms of not just running an airline, meaning the flights from here to there and so forth, but also the leadership of running an airline. He was definitely an outlier by a mile, and the other leaders in that industry and other industries just ignored him. We can't do that here. He's different. That's Herb. That's not us, et cetera, et cetera. Never accept responsibility, even if convicted, for malfeasance and so on. So, this is the line of thinking that's been around a long, long time. And I don't mean to present this to you as something cynical or whatever. That's not at all my intention. This is just, observational reality that I'm sure many of you can relate to. If you're unable to relate to this, I say bravo. You've had some very wonderful work experiences, and whoever your leadership is, I hope it lasts for as long as it can. It's great when you don't have these things to contend with. So and let me explain it this way. We have an in-group that retards the advancement of progressive management. The left-hand side shows you the social in-group, which is classical management. They accept the preconceptions and cognitive biases. They accept preconceptions, and they subscribe to cognitive biases such as overconfidence, herd mentality, loss aversion, anchoring, etc., to overcome facts. And on the right hand, and on the right-hand side, you see the social outgroup, which is the Toyota Lean people. What are they trying to do? Destroy preconceptions. All 8 categories and then some, and have cognition of facts to overcome biases. To have sensory perceptions, understand the facts of the situation to overcome those cognitive biases. Now, the social in-group does not like to hear the crap that the social out-group has to say. So the social in-group will put up some defenses, and they will say, Lean takes too long, just-in-time doesn't work, we're different, we're busy, our work varies too much, and so forth. So it's essentially a hostile response. And why do they do that? Well, it's to affirm their identity and denigrate the out-group. In other words, maintain the status quo. Where will lean go, in the future? Survival or decline? Good question, because the rate of reproduction of classical management is greater than the reproduction rate of lean management. Lean is a niche. You have, you know, a few number of so-called real lean businesses. You have a tremendous number of fake lean businesses. But out of the 213 million businesses, I think that's the number, 213 million businesses globally, might be more than that, whatever, but it's a lot. That, the vast majority of that is classical management. The fake lean stuff still is classical management. It's just some lean tools have been absorbed to apply to classical management type of problems. You don't see just in time, you don't see flow, you don't see respect for people, etc. So by reproduction rate, I mean, people are promoted to higher levels. You think about a large organization with 50,000 people, or 10,000 or 500,000. You have thousands, hundreds or thousands of managers that are coming and go and get promoted and so forth. And those vastly outnumber the number of lean managers. So you have how does lean management succeed under those conditions? Well, you need to start to engage unions. You need to start to engage society at large. If you keep doing what you've been doing in the past, it's probably not going to produce the desired result. From a leader's perspective, lean is everything a leader doesn't want. It corrupts classical management. Most leaders don't see this as an improvement in management practice. They see it as a denigration of management practice, denigration of leadership. It's not an improvement in the institution of leadership and system of profound privilege. So consequently, lean is nearly always diluted. So you have lean ultralight, which the business impact is very little, and genetically similar to classical management. And then finally, you get to lean, which has greater business impact, but not lower similarity to classical management than TMS stands for Toyota's management system. High business impact, but very little similarity to classical management. So you basically have this competition between a predatory and chaotic type of leadership compared to, and if you've worked in a company or under a leader within a company that leads as you would want to or would expect, or as a lean leader does, then you realize it's much more peaceful and amicable, and just let's focus on the facts and problem solving. Let's not blame people for problems, and that puts up a lot more barriers to understanding the facts, and people hide information and so on. So it's a much different type of leadership environment, and these two compete against one another in the real world, and the sort of the peaceful, amicable management method is struggling to move forward. Another way to look at this is, where does scientific thinking, where does it live and die? And of course, scientific thinking applies from president, CEO, board of directors on down to the workers. That's obvious, right? But the reality is the people at the bottom of the organization have to be in contact with sensory perceptions and the facts of producing products or services. And so they have to do their work by the facts of the matter. As you go higher up in the organization, the leadership tends to be more right than by fact. So I'm sure you've all had situations where you said to the supervisor or mid-manager or general manager or VP or president, XYZ is the situation, this is the problem, we've thoroughly looked at it, etc. And the leader says, well, no, we're not going to do that. So basically leading by right, and not engage with the facts and the logic of the situation at the workplace. Now, in this diagram, it's not 100% lead by right. Yes, some facts do enter into it, but a lot of this entails leading by right. So you have a divide here, which I call the business technical divide. And so at about the mid-manager level, you have this gray area, which is focused on running the business. And the method by which business problems get solved is de jure, which means by right. And it's a social problem-solving process. Typically, you just copy what other leaders do. As you're coming up through the ranks, you start to learn the CEO did X for a certain kind of problem. You come up the ranks and see that. You get to the top. What do you do? X for the same, deal with the problem the same way. And then below, you have scientific problem solving. to run the process. De facto means the facts, and that's how technical problems get solved. This is why it's so difficult to explain to bosses, when you have a technical problem, what's going on, because they're kind of, it's hard. They're having a hard time connecting with that. And they, of course, they don't go to the Gemba, they stay in their offices and so on. I guess before I move on, one of the things you got to ask yourself is, would you do any different if you were in this situation? Because you could interpret a lot of what I'm saying as a complete criticism of top leaders, but it's not that. It is, we have to recognize, would we do any different if we were in those shoes? We have status, rights, and privileges. Would we want to diminish any of those? What's the motivator for doing that? And we're concerned about how we will be viewed by our peer group. Would we be viewed as the oddball on the outside, doing what none of our other leaders, peer leaders, will do? So there's a lot of social pressure to conform to the normative circumstances of how you run a business, which is classical management. 500 years ago, business leaders dressed pretty fancy, and less fancy today, and some very casual with hoodies and jeans and so on. But really, the mindset, attitude, sentiments, the decision-making criteria are largely the same then as now. What people say is, well, yeah, Henry VIII, that was Queen Elizabeth, that was 500 years ago. It's a long time ago, and so forth. Seems like it, but when you think of it generationally, it's only 17 generations. And so a lot of how we think and do things today are exactly how King Henry and Queen Elizabeth thought about things as well. Not particularly when it comes to leadership, but also other things as well. And you can think back to, you go to ancient Egypt, that's 170 generations. Not that long ago, 5,000 years, but it's not that long ago generationally. So these traditions carry forward through time, through the generations. That makes that a bad system will beat a good person every time. You often hear this quote, you see it on LinkedIn and so forth. It's very popular, but we really need to think a little bit deeper and say, our traditions will beat a better system almost every time. We have to realize the effect that these traditions have on us. Now, some traditions are good, worth preserving, but we have to ask the question, is this tradition still useful? Is it serving its intended purpose? Is it serving some modified purpose that is still useful, or it is no longer useful? And people just don't do that. They don't question these traditions. They just say that that's the way it's always been done. Let's keep doing it, especially when it comes to leadership traditions. So, leaders, don't see the need for lean. They may in the future see it because it obviously has great possibility for huge environmental benefits, huge social benefits, and so forth. But this requires leaders to change their view of leadership that has been fairly consistent, probably since the Neolithic Revolution 12,000 years ago. So we could be in a situation where there isn't much change in leadership thinking or practice for another, 500 years, or maybe another 500 years, or excuse me, maybe another 5 years. Don't know. We'll see as things progress. Anyway, here's Douglas Dowd's quote again. What's next is most likely to be determined by what is. One of our difficulties is AI systems are teaching, learning everything, including our biases. And this is now occurring in the medical world, where AI system is telling nurses they should do X, and nurses are saying, no, we should do Y. You can well imagine an AI system being a chief, senior advisor to CEOs. And the AI system is going to be taught everything about classical management and leadership and so forth, and advising the CEO to do what has been done in the past, or maybe slightly modified, but basically the same thing. So we have to think about, working hard to destroy preconceptions so we don't end up in the future where we have been in the past. Now, classical management was developed where the need was based on individualism, and scientific management was developed based upon a seller's market, satisfying, or managing in a way that better responds to a seller's market. And TPS comes along where the need is based on a buyer's market. Where do we go from here? It seems to me the management system has to evolve to be based on human rights and the environment. Difficulty we face is that leaders, business and political leaders, have a preconception that technology will be our savior, that it will solve all of our human problems, our environmental problems, and so on. So they don't see management as a co-partner with technology solving the big problems that we have going forward: energy, water, crops, food, etc. Whatever our big challenges are in the future, they don't see leadership and management as part of this. And we need to make it part of it, because technology alone is not going to be the answer. We need the raison d'etre of Lean was improve, lower cost, improve quality, things like that. We need a new raison d'etre for progressive management. So the plan for changing from classical management to lean management was, you put some pressure on classical management and traverse a distance, and lo and behold, you'll end up at lean management. But in actuality, classical management is a much bigger, stronger thing than we realize, requires a much bigger force over a much longer distance. In other words, we have a big gap between plan and actual because we didn't understand the current state of leadership. As I said before, we jumped to a solution, and that's proved to be a big mistake. And traditions are typically insensitive to something better. So we have our work cut out for us. It's in two steps. One is to, understand the current state and of leadership and management and so forth, and start to see where we can change. Ignoring the past, as I mentioned to you, history is an important part of this stuff. Sam Haber, Professor Haber, wrote a book in 1964 where he studied scientific management. And he said the very notion of a completely integrated scientific system for the factory was a distraction to businessmen. Yet most business firms need only be more efficient than their competitors. This was one of the reasons that businessmen preferred efficiency stunts, devices, and mechanisms to a complete system of scientific management. Efficiency did not automatically come first. So we would, in today's words, we would say, efficiency stunts are the fake lean stuff, the various lean tools, etc. And we wouldn't say efficiency did not automatically come first. We would just say, productivity or performance or whatever does not automatically come first. So if we ignore the past, we ignore these things, the insights, the study, the insights, the wisdom of these people and their experiences, then, it puts us in bad shape. And lean is something that's very easy to become emotionally attached to. We invest not just our brains in terms of a technical understanding of lean principles and practices, but we're heavily emotionally attached. Our heart is very much into this stuff. And we need to, in order to have more success in getting the kind of outcomes we hope to achieve, we have to understand that current state and change how we're doing things to get to that future state. Another Achilles heel is slow response to new information. Between 1988 and 2008, the term was lean production, not lean management. There was no talk of respect for people. In lean world, JIT, Kaizen, I forgot, things like that have been just minimized or ignored. And because of our emotional attachment to lean, we have not just technical difficulties, but emotional difficulties as Lean professionals that we face that are largely ignored. You don't hear the top Lean promoters and influencers talking about this. There's no empathy. So anyway, evolving too slowly is our problem. And just to wrap it up here, we really need to understand these barriers moving forward. The past informs the present to a great degree. And I think from these books, there's only, the book on the left is like 300 pages. It's 5 by 7 inches. So these aren't huge format books. The rest of the books are less than 150 pages. And they look at this problem from a different direction. That's an important thing for you to understand is it's looking at from an aesthetic standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, from a preconception standpoint, from a rationality standpoint, and from the standpoint of the institution of leadership and system of profound privilege. So it's not just harping on the same point from the same direction. I'm analyzing this thing from different directions. Much like, if you have a fishbone diagram, the effect is not due simply to one cause. So anyway, curiosity, trying things out, learning, experimenting. Currently, the Lean world is stuck in a strategy of optimism and luck. That's not going to get us to where we need to be. So I invite your questions and hope you found this presentation interesting. And don't lose the word here. Don't lose your motivation. You should be highly motivated, but just understand the situation you're dealing with. Think like a scientist. Lots of barriers, lots of things to understand. It takes time to grasp it all and put 2 and 2 together and move forward.
Buy some of those books. Bob's right. They're not very thick. I got a lot of them here.
I know the audience. They're not going to read 500 pages as good as Toyota Culture might be or whatever.
They're very thin and they're fast reads.
Yeah. Some of them are more of a workbook format. So there's blank pages for you to fill in your thoughts.
Yeah. So thank you, Bob, for your very insightful presentation. My key takeaway is the difference between classic and lean management. Whatever is right versus whatever is wrong, and that daily destruction of our preconceptions so we can learn and test and move forward. And this is a struggle that we face, because even when things are good and we're seeing the success deploying some of these progressive management techniques and lean techniques, we have to keep challenging those cognitive biases so we don't get stuck in that status quo. Before we get into question and answers,
if I can add something, there's much to learn from these successes. And people said to me, why don't you write some other books about success stories and so forth? But they're very similar, these success stories. Again, there's much to learn from them, and there are some differences, but they're more the same than different. And I don't think it's really worth spending the time doing that. And most of Lean World is focused on success stories of some kind or another anyway. So that's not really the thing that needs to be studied and elucidated.
Yeah. We're all going to go into
TL. Yeah,
we're going to enter question and answer. I encourage all of you guys to stay connected, continue this conversation that we sparked today, explore these opportunities for collaboration, join our LinkedIn page, visit our YouTube channel. I'll throw links in the chat. And again, we'll go into a Q&A. Please post your questions in the chat or use the raise hand feature. And don't forget to unmute yourself before talking. If you use the raise hand feature, we'll use that kind of like as a Kanban to kind of see who wants to ask a question first. And if we have to go a little bit over time, I'm pretty sure that, would that be okay, Bob?
Yeah, that's no problem.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to pose, either in the chat or using the raise hand feature?
So Ted has a question here. I think you have to, Pavel, hit the see more thing. I can't. Question is truncated. Can't see it in its entirety. But anyway, question is basically, if it's a smaller business, you have less hierarchy, fewer levels, etc. and they're more dependent on profits for survival, et cetera. Do you see acceptance lean greater with small companies? Possibly, but you'd be surprised the extent to which the status, rights, and privileges thing is very important for leaders of small businesses as well as large businesses. And small business leaders are aspirational to becoming larger businesses and so forth. And so there's a fair amount of continuity between the thinking of the CEO of some, I'm not sure what's your largest Canadian company, but I'll just pick a big American company, Walmart. There's actually some continuity in thinking between them and a 50-person business, the leaders of a 50-person business. Now, that said, the focus of Lean 35 years ago was, look what Toyota's doing, General Motors, or whoever other big company should be doing this as well. And in reality, this Toyota production system, Toyota management system got started as a relatively small startup business. And so the point of focus initially should have been in the startup and small business world 35 years ago. How much would that have changed things? Would we have seen much more results today? We might have, because those companies would have grown in size with Lean. However, company, when you look at it from a top leader's perspective, is nothing more than a piece of property. Properties are bought and sold, and properties become sort of over, in a real estate sense, overgrown and derelict, meaning they go bankrupt. And so anytime you get new owners or new managers in there, you run the risk of backsliding to classical management. So even if we would have had a lot of success with startups and small businesses starting 35 years ago, a lot of those would have likely succumbed to classical management due to changes in ownership and changes in leadership.
Further to that one, Bob, Ted was asking, how does Toyota culture prevent human nature of wanting status even over profits, and are those folks weeded out?
Yeah, they probably are weeded out. I don't know, but one of the things you always have is this mentoring and coaching, and they're keeping you in between the guardrails of here's how to think, the basic way of thinking, and so you don't stray too far outside of that. So it requires this constant teaching, constant coaching, constantly challenging people to solve problems within those guardrails.
Vaughn, I saw you had your hand up from before. Did you have a question that was still unanswered?
Yeah, whenever I get to meet Bob, I always leave with more questions than I do have answers.
Hi, Vaughn. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too, Bob. Really great presentation. I got a couple questions. One is just your prediction on AI, and is it going to put Lean back further?
I mean, I think that's likely to be the case. Yeah, I mean, some people are in Lean community working to integrate Lean and AI, and they'll probably be successful at doing that because I think there's some smart people doing that, but that's a very small number of people who are doing that. And AI is just, leaders of organizations, whether it's back to ancient Egypt or through today, they like technology, whether it's new military technology or new machine technology or new software and computing technology. And so they always go for this stuff. And it may not work out as planned, it may end up causing problems, whatever, but they'll maintain that path.
Thank you.
So yeah,
one more question. What has to happen with the Womacs and Joneses and the Likers and the Shooks to support a change? Like, when is this going to happen?
They're not going to support it as far as I can tell. They have no interest in this. They're just going to let the ball roll forward in its current direction. A ball in motion stays in motion, and they're not going to. Doesn't seem like they're going to perturb that. You have to ask them if you can access them. Why that is? Why they're not interested in acknowledging these realities and leading some kind of change. I don't know
Yeah.
the answer to it. I've never asked. They don't talk to me for kind of obvious reasons.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, over the 170 generations or whatever, however many you said it was, our brains are now wired to think in this traditional or classical management way, and it can be undone. But how long is it going to take?
Yeah, and there's a pecking order in lean world. There's some people high up in status, and there's some people much lower down, and that's calls into question respect for people, continuous improvement. Because part of in lean world, in a corporation, you shrink the layers and so forth, and you, like in Toyota, everybody wears the same uniform, so you don't have this stratification, and the boss goes to the Gemba and things like this. So if in lean world you have the same thing as classical management, which we do, which is certain, the top people and top influencers are here and everybody else is down there, you've not continuously improved the reduction in hierarchical standing, nor have you respected people. You've just continued along with classical management. So how ironic.
Thank you.
I would ask Bob, a lot of us, like, if we're sitting here talking and listening to you, probably we're on the choir side of things, so we kind of get a lot of this stuff. But so do you have like a nugget of hope or an insight that you can give to the group here? 'Cause I know you, and I don't want to say this, like a lot of your reading, you talk about this other stuff as well too, because it needs to be talked about, right? We need to look at all this stuff because we have to break these biases. But is there something that you think you can give to the community to say, if you look at this might be a path forward?
Well, I have yes. I mean, things do change. So, for example, and I'm not meaning to bring up a point that might be controversial to you. It's just an example that, attitudes about marriage between, gay and lesbian marriage changed a lot here in the United States in a short period of time. And so that's an example of something that comes to mind quickly, of where sentiments can change pretty quickly within the space of 5 or 6 years. And so there is hope, given the trajectory we're on environmentally, the horrible fires in Canada, higher ocean temperatures. Jen's an article I printed out today from, I think, the Washington Post, says what Gen Z people want in the workplace. Companies have to adapt to a new generation of employees. Some of these things may come together to create a tipping point where leaders say, we can't keep leading the same way we always have. There's too many, brilliant people at all levels, but particularly lower levels of the organization, that we need to listen to for different wants and needs and different capabilities, and to do different things, not just make a better product or deliver a better service, but our existence within organizations and our existence with the environment, not just the built environment, just the environment inclusive of built and otherwise. And so, there's hope that there's some kind of enlightenment that might occur in a few years.
Awesome. Sarah, you have your hand for a question.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Bob. Holy crap, that was an awesome presentation. So many light bulbs, it's rad.
Thank you.
So I've done a lot of thinking over the past few years now about biases and preconceptions, and trying to tear down that human survival instinct and understanding where it comes from, right? Especially biases, because it's not just in workplace, it's also the biases that we have with other people, and how divisive our society has become, right? Including in that is something that I think is really difficult, is dealing with the fear of hypocrisy, because we're taught that in a very faith-based kind of world that if you have one belief system, you have to stick to it, or you're a hypocrite and you don't have integrity, right? So my question is, you know, in trying to disrupt this like preconceived biases in people, how do we do that while making them feel safe still? Like, how do we take away the fear and give them the opportunity for change and go, you know, but it's okay? Like,
well, let me first say, you know, hypocrisy is a leadership right and privilege. So I'm sure you'll notice that, you know, political leaders and leaders of businesses have no problem being hypocritical. I mean, it's a right and privilege. It comes with status. You know, what you said yesterday and what you say today can be two diametrically opposed things, and people at lower levels just have to accept it. They can call the boss out and say, well, you're being hypocritical or whatever, and the boss is like, so what? But that's much more risky for people at lower levels, you know, to engage in that. And it's basically, we don't have the status, right, or privilege to do that. Our very few, you know, unicorn lean leaders are okay with people changing their viewpoint and perspective, and they encourage it. It's not it. You know, people talk a lot about psychological safety, which of course is irrelevant to classical management leaders because fear is part of their, you know, modus operandi. So they have no interest in psychological safety or giving that. But our lean leaders, it's more than psychological safety. Is that they're actively encouraging you to change your perspective on X, Y, or Z. You know, whatever it is in the workplace. They want you to do that, to come to work fully brain engaged to making those kinds of changes. And it's okay to be a hypocrite. Yesterday you thought you needed to lay bricks this way, and today you think it's this way. Okay, good. Let's go. And they don't even think twice about it. You know, it's like, yeah, that's yesterday's viewpoint. This is today. Let's try it out. You know, forward. Mm-hmm. It's part of the no blame ethos, you know, of progressive management. Back in Taylor's day, it was called betterment and cooperation. Cooperation was the analog for respect for people then, 120 years ago. Frank Woolard in the 1920s and 30s in the UK, it was continuous improvement and betterment for all. And with TPS, you know, with Ono in the 70s or 80s, it was continuous improvement and respect for humanity, respect for people. Actually, Kaizen and respect for humanity. So, you know, we're just allowed to think differently and encouraged to think differently. I wouldn't even call it a psychological safety thing. It's you're pushed in that direction, pushed towards the cliff to think differently. Right.
So I should basically just throw all my leaders off the edge of a cliff. I'm good with that.
No, the lean leader is throwing us off the cliff. You know, it's like pushing us into the pool to think differently. You know, I can't swim, I can't do this, I can't do that. Boom, there you go, in you go. Try it out.
Right.
Don't push the leaders off. That's wrong. But yeah, the issue is though, how do we gain credibility and influence with those leaders? Mm-hmm. And that's a difficult problem because they mainly look to each other, their peer group, as being the only ones who are credible and influential. I'm sure you've heard many times people at work say, oh yeah, with that boss, you got to make them think that was their idea.
100%.
That's what's going on here. The only people they listen to are either themselves or their peer group. And the problem with that, of course, is we got to spend weeks or months or years trying to make the boss think of it themselves. And time waste. And then the company says, oh, now we got financial problems. And we got to have layoffs and these other problems, blah, blah, blah. Well, why do we have those? Well, because it's taken 2 years to get you to think it's you thought of it. You know, it's absurd. By the way, I hope people, Naval, you've read a lot of my work. Does the absurdity of the situation shine through in the writing?
Yes, it totally does. And I feel it as well too. Just
I mean, that's a lot of what I write about. It's just it's absurd situation. Let's just look at it for what it is.
And that's one of the reasons why I volunteer my time with this community practice, is because I want to build a different peer group and to promote this stuff and to talk about this stuff. the good and the bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's
Yeah.
that's where the learning happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
So go ahead, Bob.
Vaughn had a question.
Okay.
Yeah, just a comment really quick. Sarah reminded me of something, and I threw it in the chat. It's a project that's going on, Project Implicit, and it's not a diagnostic, but it helps you educate yourself on your biases, your individual biases. Check it out. Yeah.
Okay. Other thoughts or comments? Yeah, if you want to reconvene sometime. Ted has a question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit of the Bob brought it up, or I'm sure I didn't see who brought it, but about the disconnect with you and Womack and I mean, what is the? I guess I've kind of seen a little bit of that on LinkedIn or some of your comments, but I don't quite get it. Do they? Is the situation that they don't really, in your opinion, do not understand the problem, or can you speak to that a little bit?
I think they know there's a problem. No, I'm sure they know there's a problem. They don't understand it in the detail that my writing presents, and they don't want to confront the problem publicly. And I've, in my writing, said that's a disservice to the Lean community because they're shielding Lean community from the facts, and they're allowing people to struggle needlessly. I mean, one of the things you learn from Toyota people on your first day of Kaizen is the worker should not have to struggle to do their job. And we take that thought forward, whether it's the worker is the shop floor, the electrician, whatever your world is, if it's a service world, the estimator, somebody do quantity takeoff, whatever it is, nobody should struggle. And including Lean professionals should not be struggling. What are our leaders in the Lean community doing to help prevent you from struggling? Well, one of the things to help prevent you from struggling is not to gaslight you and say, you're not succeeding, it's your fault, which is the hidden message. That no, everybody's, to have a conversation. I mean, just, it's Lean Anonymous. Everybody gets together and say, yeah, I'm struggling, you're struggling, we're struggling. Let's just acknowledge this reality so that we can then move forward with trying to find some things to do to address our struggles. But they seem completely disinterested in this. And I just think it's totally inconsistent with Lean thinking, if you like, but I prefer to say it's totally inconsistent with TPS and the Toyota way. And of course, they're not perfect at Toyota, and they have, difficulties at times of acknowledging their own realities, etc. And so at times they can be inconsistent, but what we have is an inconsistency here with our top Lean promoters that's going on, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years, depends upon where you want to start the clock. But I would say definitely by the early 2000s. I mean, I could see it in the late 90s that the fake Lean thing was apparent. In the 90, I don't know when it was, 97, 98, 99 timeframe. I came to this in 1994. So, to me, this is a great disservice to your customers. They're buying the Lean training, the Lean books that you're selling. They're reading your posts and whatever. This is no way to treat your customers. It's a shabby way to treat your customers. And most people in the Lean community don't see what I just said as being existing, apparently.
Yeah, I guess that's you come up with that bad boy of Lean.
Saying things. Well, I say things that other people are thinking, or that they can't say publicly because they have some risk or whatever with their employer, or they don't want to be, they don't want to say, yeah, you're right, Bob, because then it's like, yeah, then I get attached to Bob Emiliani personally, and I don't want to be attached to him. And some people have done that. Some prominent Lean people have basically said, I'm done with you. I don't, unplug from LinkedIn, unplug from whatever. But these all of them are the rah-rah types. They're the gaslighters. They're the success stories. How dare you talk about the reality of the situation? I don't know what their motivation is for unplugging me and whatever. You'd have to ask them. I don't want to impute a motive that I have no idea about. So what do we have? Opportunity for improvement. Ted, did that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. I guess I'm still unclear. So you want them to do what differently though? Just admit the problem, or is
That's the first step. They have to
Yeah.
admit there's a problem. First step. Just like Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever Anonymous or
just admit, yep.
the dieting or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Drive too fast, whatever the case may be. Smoke too much pot. Speaking of which, no.
Yeah, well, there's a
get to that later.
That's like 80% of businesses or teams that deploy Lean, they fail, or they fail to sustain it, right? And that type of stuff doesn't get talked about in the more general Lean world, right? Everyone talks about, if Lean's so awesome, then why isn't everyone doing it? And Bob comes along and he starts to kind of shine a light about, well, hey, this could be one of the reasons why it doesn't stick, right? And a lot of people don't like to talk about that type of stuff, and it's just human nature. You don't want to talk about some of the kind of uncomfortable conversations that are going to occur, right? Which again goes kind of counter to the whole Lean methodology and Toyo production system. Like, we got to look at everything, face those cognitive biases, and draw them out and go, is this still valid or not? Right.
Yeah, let me just say briefly, I know we're running over on time, but the basic way of thinking is respect stakeholders, cooperation, teamwork. I mean, we need to, as a Lean community, cooperate and have teamwork on these type of problems. Mutual prosperity, long-term view, mutual trust, it's a healthy and safe workplace. The Lean community is not a healthy and safe workplace because of the gaslighting and so forth that goes on. Ethical behavior, eliminate waste. I mean, the basic way of thinking in the TPS world is not what's going on in Lean world. And so it looks like I'm one of the few that are willing to speak up and call it out for what it is.
And that's kind of why you kind of see this. Those of us who've been following it go, yeah, well, there's kind of like this hidden war, this secret war that's kind of going on. I wouldn't even say war is probably too strong of a term, but yeah, there's a divide.
One thing Mr. Nakao said in the Shingijutsu Kaizen book is, whatever the problems are, you have to put the manager's face in it. That doesn't win you a lot of friends necessarily, but at some point, the facts are the facts, and they have to be acknowledged. And otherwise, this Lean thing just doesn't, go where. To pick up on Ted's particulars that he talked about, Womack, Jones, Shook, I forgot who else he mentioned. It's not going to go where they want it to go. Oh, thank you for the kind words, Vaughn. So anyway, listen, if you want to reconvene at some point to talk about whatever, I mean, for example, we can talk about a success story, Wiremold, and I can go through some slides there to specifically say why they were successful and how that a lot of this would transfer to your world in the construction and so forth. Or we can talk about more of the dismal topic here, if you like, or anything in between.
Definitely going to be taking you up on that there, Bob.
Now, summer in Canada, I imagine you guys are like gone. Vacation time, right?
Yeah, that's why we stopped. We kind of paused during July and August, because we've been in this pressure cooker of snow for so long, and summer's only so long, and it's really hard to get people together.
Yep. So if you want to do something in September, October, November, let me know. Happy to do it.
I'm going to book you in for sure.
Okay.
So once again, just to bring it to a close, we want to extend our gratitude to you, Bob, for sharing with us today, and to everyone in attendance. thank you for being part of the Lean YEG and helping us build this thriving lean community up here in Edmonton. And we look forward to welcoming all of you back after summer. And we're going to tap Bob's shoulder to talk to us again on maybe wire mold or something else. On that note, I want to wish you all a very productive and filling day ahead. And try to, I look outside, it's kind of hazy out there. So with the wildfires going on, stay safe out there.
Yeah, have a safe and enjoyable summer.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, everyone.